Yep, it's true. It's not just clickbait. This morning I sold my MG ZS EV. Only a couple of months ago I was giving you the lowdown on 9 months of MG ZS EV ownership, singing its praises and very much confirming I was very happy with it. But today it's driven off to pastures new. You might be wondering why this is, but let me assure you, it's not a slight on the car itself. I was still very much happy with it, it was doing a very good job with no complaints. Used car prices are absolutely crazy at the moment. There's a real shortage of good quality used stock in the market, and this is driven by a number of factors. The global semiconductor shortage is slowing the availability of new cars dramatically, although perhaps not so much for MG, who just announced that record shipment of cars into the UK. This means that used cars are either in higher demand because people are choosing to buy lightly used instead of waiting ages for a new car to be delivered, or they're hanging on to what they have for longer because there's delays with new cars. Now, be under no illusion, you're never going to make money by buying a brand new car fresh from the showroom like I did, driving it for a year and then selling it. First year depreciation is absolutely savage for pretty much any car. Back in March, when my ZS EV was just 6 months old, We Buy Any Car offered me £14,625 for it. That's only 65% of the original price I paid for it when it was new. That's a huge loss in a very short period of time. But perhaps no surprise, is it? People often say you'll lose the VAT from a new car as soon as you drive it off the forecourt. And there was certainly no shortage of new and nearly new ZS EVs back then. Quite a lot of MG's record September sales in 2020 seemed to be pre-registered cars rather than ones that were sold to the public. And all of that stock would need to shift before anybody would want anything to do with a car that had actually been owned and used by someone, rather than just gathering dust on the forecourt. A couple of months later, in May, they were offering £18,500 for it. These used stock shortages and delays on new cars are starting to bite now, and prices are firming up a little bit. That's perhaps more in line than the shock horror valuation from a couple of months prior, more in line with what you'd expect. Today's valuation in August sits at £19,000, and in fact I've just sold the car privately for £19,250. I could have probably held out for a little bit more, but I had trade offers of around that from other sources, not just We Buy Any Car. And at the end of the day, those traders are just going to bang it straight on a forecourt for 21, 22 grand. So I was quite happy to sell it privately, give someone the chance at ownership without having to spend quite as much as they would do at a dealer. And the buyer, to fair play to him, he arrived when he said he would, didn't mess around trying to beat the price down. Checked the car over, paid up and left. Exactly what you need, really. If you're going to buy a car for this kind of value, there's two things you want to be aware of. Always carry out an HPI check to make sure the car is free from finance, hasn't been involved in a total loss accident or anything like that. And be prepared to call your bank when you try to bank transfer 20 grand to a random stranger and it flags up with the fraud department and tells you to call them. As I said, you're never going to make money chopping and changing nearly new cars. But 86% retained value I think is pretty good going, to the point that actually beats some of the lease rates I was getting quoted when I bought the car. And that would have been a 3 or 4 year lease, not just a year. So I think I've managed to actually just about squeeze in above the point where I've lost the VAT that everyone goes on about as well. I'm actually £500 ahead of that, so pretty happy with that. I think that's a pretty good outcome. So what's next? Well, the new MG5 Long Range is pretty tempting, isn't it? A 250 mile range version of the MG5 EV, the all-electric estate, the only all-electric estate on the market, in fact. And that not only has a larger battery, but it also adds some of the features that I know and love from the ZS, like MG Pilot. And some of those features that I think that I wouldn't be without now, having had them. So adaptive cruise control, as well as the sort of the semi-autonomous MG Pilot thing. To be honest, I'm not so bothered about the lane keeping and all that comes with MG Pilot, but the adaptive cruise itself, where it will fairly effectively track the car that you're following and slow you down if they slow down and stuff, it just takes a bit of the tedium out of motorway driving. And decent deals on these cars are starting to emerge as well. I've heard that some dealers are doing pricing sort of in line with the Affinity prices at some dealers, which would put it at sort of 24.5 grand for the exclusive model and the Excite's a little bit cheaper. And I think that makes it a little bit of a bargain, really. And I think the MG5 Long Range should definitely be a contender for anyone looking for an EV. But it would suit my needs pretty well as well, I think. There's also a lot of rumours flying around at the moment that a facelift ZS EV is imminent. I haven't got any concrete evidence of this, but it's hotly tipped to be basically based on the facelift petrol model that you can currently buy. But it'll come with a larger battery, and some people are even talking about 2 battery options, so a sort of 60 odd kilowatt hour battery in line with the long range MG5, and an even bigger 72 kilowatt hour battery option as well. There's no concrete information on that yet, but it's likely to be a little bit more expensive than the outgoing model. I can't realistically see MG pricing that much above the MG5, because I think the two need to sit sort of side by side. Otherwise, it will be pretty difficult to sell. So it'd be interesting to see what they come up with. But I do wonder if there's been any improvements to the ride and handling, because it's probably one of my biggest criticisms of the ZS. Just a little bit too soft, made for a comfortable ride, but certainly just firming it up just a touch would make driving on B roads a little bit more pleasurable. So I don't know if that'll be part of any facelift, but I have been told that this facelift model is coming in the next couple of months. And it actually makes me wonder if it's not a bad time to have exited the ZS EV that I had as well, because if that facelift model does come out and is priced competitively, I have no doubt that that will have a little bit of an effect on used values as well. So we haven't quite seen that with the MG5 yet, but I think in the coming months we might see just a little bit of a decline in the values of the sort of outgoing model, but time will tell. Then, of course, moving away from MG, there's a plethora of new EVs on the market that just weren't available this time last year. VW, Audi, Skoda seem to be releasing new models every 5 minutes, and there's definitely some very competitive deals around and stuff like the ID.3, the ID.4, the Skoda Enyaq. Not the bargain basement pricing that MG offers, of course, but definitely priced well enough to capture my attention. Truth be told, though, I'm not actually going to be rushing to buy a replacement EV. I'm looking to move to a bigger house in the near future, providing my current place sells. Maybe get something a bit more resembling a film studio than my current surroundings, which would be nice. And I'll need the cash for the deposit for that. So my plan going forward is just to daily the Kangoo ZE as much as practical, which at the moment at least would cover any of the sort of very local running around I do, the vast majority of my usage really. It's got, as we proved, it's got a 50-60 mile fairly usable range. The vast majority of my driving would fall within that anyway. Longer journeys, I'm going to try and use our i3 as much as possible, which is the 60 ampere range extender model. So I mean, occasionally having to use a little bit of petrol where charging either isn't convenient or where, you know, I need to just go a bit further without having to stop. The i3, if you use the battery and the petrol, probably sort of almost in line with the ZS EV range-wise, maybe a little bit short, but it would mean that those journeys that I use the ZS for, I could use the i3 for if I wanted to. But unfortunately, on days where I can't pry the keys out of my other half's hands, if I do need to go a bit further, because it is her car after all, the i3, I might unfortunately need to resort to using a petrol car if I've got no other option. Not ideal, but once the dust settles with the house stuff, I'll be back to exploring my options. For now, a fleet reduction, freeing up some cash, definitely the right place to be. It does of course mean I can continue to bring you EV related content, just with a slight change of scenery, because I'll either be in the i3 or in the Kangoo. And it'll hopefully mean I can actually bring you some more frequent stuff with a van, because it's just kind of been plodding along, rather forgotten about. It's been doing its thing, I have been using it, I just haven't had time to actually talk about it much and produce any videos featuring it. And who knows, you might actually finally get to see me remove the sign writing from it, which I meant to do about 6 months ago, and I'm still driving that about with someone else's company name on the side. And I really should get on with that, shouldn't I? For those that are here for the MG content, I do hope you'll stick around. There's a lot more to come. I definitely understand if you're feeling a little bit deflated by this news. But bear in mind, the MG5 Long Range really is in the running to replace the ZS EV. Many thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.